Betrayal was your choice. Consequences are mine.
Fair warning, this gets absolutely insane. And I'm talking scorched earth, nuclear-level revenge that took months of careful planning and strategic thinking to execute properly. We're talking about the kind of methodical destruction that would make Machiavelli himself nod with approval. Buckle up, because you're about to witness the most comprehensive surgical takedown I've ever orchestrated in my entire life. This isn't just revenge. This is a masterclass in patience, preparation, and the devastating power of keeping your mouth shut while your enemies destroy themselves. Picture this utterly surreal scene. I'm sitting in my own kitchen on what had started as a perfectly normal Tuesday morning in October, enjoying my usual black coffee from my favorite ceramic mug and casually scrolling through news headlines on my tablet, when this complete stranger, and I mean someone I'd never laid eyes on before in my entire life, just walks through my unlocked front door like he owns the damn place and pays the mortgage. No knocking, no doorbell, no polite request for entry, absolutely nothing. Just strolls in wearing this insufferably smug expression that immediately made my skin crawl and my arterial pressure spike. My wife of 12 supposedly happy years is trailing behind him like a devoted puppy, pretending to be completely absorbed in scrolling through her phone screen, but obviously watching my face like a hawk circling wounded prey, waiting for the inevitable explosive reaction she's probably been fantasizing about for weeks. She's got that barely contained excitement you see in people who think they're about to witness a spectacular car crash and want front row seats for the carnage. This absolute clown of a human being has the unmitigated audacity and sheer brass balls to lean against my kitchen doorframe like some discount movie villain from a straight-to-DVD thriller, crossing his ankles in what he probably thinks is a casual, intimidating pose, and delivers his carefully rehearsed little declaration with all the theatrical precision of someone who's been practicing this moment in front of his bathroom mirror for weeks. She's coming with me tonight, not staying with you anymore, buddy. Deal with it like a man. He said it exactly like he was reading tomorrow's weather forecast directly from his smartphone app. Casual as you please, like completely destroying someone's marriage and 12-year relationship was just another mundane Tuesday morning chore to check off his pathetic little to-do list, right between picking up dry cleaning and getting an oil change. Both of them are literally vibrating with barely contained anticipation, standing there in my kitchen like they're waiting for the main event at some twisted psychological circus, expecting me to completely lose my mind and give them the full dramatic breakdown they'd obviously spent countless hours planning and rehearsing together. They wanted the complete Hollywood treatment, screaming at the top of my lungs, breaking dishes against the wall, throwing my coffee mug across the room, maybe some pathetic begging or empty threats of violence that would make them feel even more superior and justified in their betrayal. Classic humiliation theater, perfectly choreographed for maximum psychological impact and future storytelling material at cocktail parties. Instead, I very deliberately and slowly set my coffee mug down on the granite countertop with the gentlest possible touch, making sure the ceramic made barely a whisper against the stone surface. Looked this pathetic stranger directly in his self-satisfied, smirking eyes without blinking once, and said exactly 2 carefully chosen words in the calmest, most level voice I could manage. Noted. Understood. That was literally it. 4 syllables delivered in a tone so flat and emotionless it could have been generated by a computer, followed by complete, absolutely deafening silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 15 seconds. The change in their expressions was absolutely priceless. They actually burst into that brittle, nervous laughter people do when they're not entirely sure whether they should be feeling triumphant or genuinely terrified by what they've just witnessed. I could see them exchanging these quick, confused glances over my head, trying to figure out if I was in complete psychological shock, totally defeated by their grand revelation, or just pathetically broken beyond any normal human response. She kept looking at him like she was expecting him to do something more, say something else, maybe escalate the situation somehow. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly unsettled by my complete lack of reaction, probably wondering if this was some kind of trap, or if I was just too stunned to process what had happened. Poor fools had absolutely no clue whatsoever that they just triggered the most comprehensive, methodical, systematically planned revenge campaign of their miserable, pathetic little lives. They thought they were witnessing my complete surrender, and total defeat. What they were actually seeing was my calm, calculated declaration of absolute war. Here's where this story gets really interesting and why you should never underestimate quiet people who don't immediately react to provocation. When my Uncle Frank passed away about 15 years ago after suffering a massive, unexpected heart attack at the age of 68, he left me this completely nondescript, utterly unmarked office building in what was then the absolute worst, most dangerous part of downtown. I'm talking about the kind of neighborhood where even the streetlights looked nervous after dark, where police patrols happened maybe twice a shift if you were lucky, and where most legitimate businesses had fled decades earlier. The building itself was a squat, unremarkable brick structure with no business signage anywhere, no posted hours of operation, no company directory in the lobby, no indication whatsoever of what kind of operations happened behind those thick walls during business hours or after dark. To anyone walking past, it looked like it had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. I'd been faithfully paying property taxes, insurance premiums, and basic maintenance fees on this mysterious place for over a decade, without ever really thinking seriously about actually using it for anything productive or profitable. Uncle Frank had never been particularly forthcoming about what exactly he did for a living, always giving vague answers about consulting and private investigations when family members asked about his work. What I discovered that night was that Uncle Frank hadn't been running a legitimate accounting firm, legal practice, or consulting business at all. The man had spent over 40 years methodically collecting what he diplomatically called insurance policies on practically everyone who mattered in our city's business, political, and social circles. He was essentially running his own private intelligence agency, gathering compromising information and storing it for potential future use. After they strutted out of my house that morning, looking absolutely thrilled with themselves, I drove straight to that forgotten building for the first time in probably 8 years. Hadn't stepped foot inside since the funeral, honestly. The place was absolutely thick with dust and that distinctive smell of old paper and forgotten secrets, but everything was exactly where Uncle had left it, like a time capsule of municipal corruption. 4 massive industrial-grade filing cabinets lined the back wall, each one secured with heavy brass locks that had probably been installed sometime in the 1980s. An enormous safe dominated one corner, the kind of thing you'd need dynamite to crack open. Bankers' boxes stretched from floor to ceiling along every available wall, all meticulously labeled in Uncle's distinctive handwriting with dates, names, and cryptic reference numbers. I spent the entire night methodically going through everything, using the keys Uncle had hidden in his desk drawer. This wasn't just random paperwork. This was a masterclass in leverage acquisition. Photographs of city council members taking envelopes of cash, signed confessions from judges admitting to fixed verdicts, financial records proving systematic tax evasion by half the Chamber of Commerce, recorded phone conversations that would end careers and potentially send people to federal prison. Uncle had basically been operating as an unofficial intelligence agency for 4 decades, and now all of that carefully gathered ammunition belonged to me. But while I'm excavating decades of municipal secrets, I make an even more interesting discovery about my own situation. Turns out my beloved wife had been spectacularly, almost criminally careless with her digital security over the past several months. Old cloud storage accounts still syncing across multiple devices. Deleted text messages automatically backed up to servers she'd completely forgotten about. Intimate photographs stored on shared drives that were technically accessible to anyone with the right login credentials. Her entire affair with this loser, documented in excruciating, embarrassing detail. 8 solid months of their relationship captured in thousands of messages, every crude joke they'd made at my expense, every rendezvous they'd planned in hotels I was probably paying for with our joint credit card, every photo without clothes she'd sent him while I was working late to support her lifestyle, every nasty comment about my appearance, my personality, my performance in bed, all of it preserved in digital amber, ready to be screenshot and shared with anyone who might find it interesting. But that discovery, as devastating as it should have been, was just the appetizer course. The real nuclear weapon was something she'd tearfully confessed to me during a complete emotional breakdown about 5 years earlier. She'd committed what she euphemistically described as a bookkeeping error at her accounting firm, which was actually systematic embezzlement disguised as innocent mathematical mistakes. She'd been skimming money from client accounts for almost 2 years, always small amounts that wouldn't trigger immediate attention, but it had eventually added up to nearly 6 figures of stolen funds, career-ending, reputation-destroying, potentially felony-level criminal behavior that could have sent her to actual prison if the right people had found out about it. I'd helped her cover it up back then because I was stupidly, blindly in love and wanted to protect her from the consequences of her own greed and stupidity. Spent my own money to quietly replace what she'd stolen, helped her falsify records to hide the trail, even convinced some of her clients to accept corrected statements without asking too many questions. Now, I was going to dig all of that up with a backhoe and use it to destroy her completely. The next morning, I walked into my attorney's office carrying a manila envelope so thick it looked like a small-town phone book. We'd been working together for over 25 years, handling everything from my business incorporation to Uncle's estate, so he knew better than to ask unnecessary questions when I showed up looking serious. Within 4 hours of signing papers, every single asset we'd accumulated during our 12-year marriage had mysteriously vanished into an impenetrable labyrinth of family trusts, holding companies and offshore accounts that existed solely under my control. The house deed that used to show both our names, now exclusively owned by an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary. Her precious business partnership shares that she loved bragging about at cocktail parties, transferred overnight to a shell corporation with no public connection to my identity. Joint bank accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, that lakeside cabin where we'd spent our honeymoon and countless anniversaries. Absolutely everything she assumed was partially hers disappeared behind legal barriers she could never climb without my express written permission. And that permission would never ever come, not if she lived to be 100 years old. 2 days later, right on schedule, she calls me from her favorite upscale boutique, voice dripping with that artificially sweet tone she always used when she needed me to solve one of her problems. Honey, something weird happened. My credit card got declined at the register. I can practically hear the mortification bleeding through the phone. She's standing there in front of the sales clerk and probably half a dozen other customers, multiple cards being rejected one after another, everyone staring and whispering while she tries to maintain her composure. That's strange, I say with completely fake concern. Maybe try a different card? I already did. I'd tried 3 different cards and they're all coming back declined. There must be some kind of computer error or fraud alert or something. I let that information hang in the air for a long moment, listening to her breathing get faster and more panicked. Maybe ask your boyfriend to cover it for you, I suggest helpfully, then immediately hang up. While she's having her very public, very humiliating financial meltdown in front of strangers, I'm sitting in my bank manager's office, calmly signing paperwork that officially closes every single joint account we'd shared over more than a decade together. Every checking account, every savings account, every credit line, every investment account, all closed permanently, all remaining funds transferred immediately to new accounts that exist solely in my name at a completely different financial institution across town. Accounts she doesn't know exist, can't access, and will never even find out about. That evening, I take a pleasant little drive to his apartment complex, one of those generic modern buildings with too much glass and not enough actual character. It's the kind of place that charges premium rent for basic amenities and calls itself luxury living in the marketing brochures. I know they're both out somewhere celebrating their big victory over stupid, clueless me, probably buying expensive drinks and laughing about how easily they'd managed to destroy my marriage and humiliate me in my own kitchen. Perfect timing for what I had planned. The package I carefully place outside his apartment door looks completely innocent. Plain brown wrapping paper, neat packaging, no return address or identifying marks of any kind. Could be anything from Amazon or a delayed birthday gift from a relative. Inside are 2 separate bundles that will systematically destroy every aspect of his pathetic existence. Bundle number 1 contains printed copies of every text message, every email, every photo, every voice memo they'd exchanged over the past 8 months. Their entire secret relationship documented in chronological order with timestamps and metadata, every nasty joke about my appearance, every crude sexual reference, every intimate photo she'd sent him, every plan they'd made to meet behind my back, all of it formatted professionally and bound like a legal document. Bundle number 2 is even more devastating. Carefully edited copies of my wife's old embezzlement confession, skillfully modified to implicate him as an active conspirator rather than just someone she'd eventually confided in. Dates that coincidentally align with when they first started messaging. Dollar amounts that match deposits to accounts he'd opened around the same time. Internal company memos that suggest ongoing coordination between them. None of it is technically false, but it's presented in a way that creates a very compelling narrative about criminal conspiracy and ongoing fraud, the kind of circumstantial evidence that would definitely get someone fired and possibly investigated by law enforcement. No threatening letter, no dramatic ultimatum, no demands for money or behavior changes. Just evidence, sitting there like a perfectly designed time bomb with a very short fuse. He discovers it the next morning when he stumbles out to grab his usual coffee, probably still half drunk from their celebration the night before. I can only imagine the progression of expressions across his face as he starts reading through their own words, printed in stark black and white. Every nasty comment about me suddenly feels different when it's documented evidence of maltreatment. Every intimate detail they thought was completely private becomes potential blackmail material. Every stupid inside joke looks absolutely pathetic when it's part of an official record. By the time he reaches the second bundle and starts seeing his name connected to financial crimes, he's probably having a full-scale panic attack right there in his hallway. See, this particular guy was already skating on extremely thin ice at his corporate job. A couple of formal performance warnings in his file, some uncomfortable questions about his expense reports, rumors that he'd been padding his client billing hours. The kind of employee who was probably one major screw-up away from getting fired anyway. Within 48 hours, that carefully prepared package somehow finds its way to exactly the right executive assistant, who makes absolutely sure it lands on exactly the right desk at exactly the right time. Amazing how these things happen sometimes. His direct supervisor gets an anonymous tip about potential criminal activity involving employee misconduct and possible embezzlement. HR opens an immediate investigation. Security escorts him out of the building that same afternoon with his personal belongings in a cardboard box. But that was just the beginning of his problems. His landlord receives a very official phone call later that same day about ongoing legal complications involving the tenant in Unit 3B. Something about potential criminal charges and possible asset seizure that could complicate the rental agreement. Lease terminated immediately, no appeal process available, 30 days to vacate the premises. But here's where I really started having fun with this whole situation. Turns out that family trust I'd established for asset protection is incredibly useful for all sorts of legitimate business purposes, including real estate acquisition and property management. Especially when you're targeting undervalued commercial properties in transitional neighborhoods that show strong potential for development and gentrification. Properties like, for example, the converted warehouse building where his precious little artisanal coffee shop operates, along with about 6 other small businesses that probably can't afford significant rent increases. The previous owner had been trying to sell for almost 2 years without much success, and my cash offer was substantially above his asking price. No inspection period, no financing contingencies, no complicated negotiations. Closed the deal in 8 days, which might be a record for commercial real estate in this market. Suddenly, completely by coincidence, I find myself as the new landlord of the man who'd told me to deal with my wife leaving me for him. First order of business as the new property owner, comprehensive review of all existing lease agreements and market rate analysis for similar commercial spaces in the area. Turns out everyone in the building had been paying significantly below market rent for years, probably because the previous owner was too lazy or too nice to adjust prices appropriately. Time to fix that obvious oversight. New rental rates effective immediately, triple the previous amount, with 30 days to pay the increased rate or vacate the premises. Completely legal under the existing lease terms, totally enforceable in court, absolutely devastating to small businesses operating on thin profit margins. The man who'd casually told me to deal with my marriage falling apart now faced losing both his apartment and his business within the same month. The poetic justice was absolutely delicious. 3 weeks into this beautiful disaster, she decides to try the reconciliation approach, probably after realizing that her new boyfriend was suddenly unemployed and homeless, while she was completely broke and potentially facing her own legal problems. She picks this upscale restaurant where she knows I used to take her for anniversaries and special occasions. Shows up wearing that red dress she always saved for when she really wanted something from me. Even orders the expensive wine she knows I used to enjoy. Spends the first 20 minutes of dinner reminiscing about our wonderful memories together and how we shouldn't throw away everything we've built over the years. Talks about counseling, about working through our problems, about how much she's learned from this difficult experience. Classic manipulation tactics, delivered with practiced sincerity. Halfway through her carefully rehearsed performance, I calmly slide a manila envelope across the white tablecloth. She opens it, expecting maybe divorce papers or settlement offers or custody arrangements. Instead, it's his official eviction notice from the coffee shop, signed and dated and completely final. "He's being forced to move his business?" she asks, and I can literally hear her world starting to crack around the edges. I don't answer. Don't need to. Some questions transform into answers all by themselves when you just let the silence stretch long enough. By the end of that month, both of their lives were in complete, irreversible freefall. His coffee shop closed permanently when he couldn't make the tripled rent payments. 12 employees lost their jobs. Several $1,000s worth of equipment got repossessed. His dream of being an independent business owner died, along with his credit rating. Her accounting career imploded when those old financial irregularities mysteriously resurfaced during a routine compliance audit triggered by an anonymous tip to the state licensing board. Professional license suspended pending investigation. Reputation destroyed throughout the entire local business community, facing potential criminal charges and civil lawsuits from former clients. They started pointing fingers at each other almost immediately, each one blaming the other for how everything had gone sideways so spectacularly fast. Their passionate love affair turned into bitter recriminations and legal threats within a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, I moved into Uncle's renovated building, which turned out to be worth approximately 10 times my most optimistic estimate. Prime downtown real estate, perfectly positioned for the gentrification wave that was already transforming the entire neighborhood. Those old business connections of Uncle's, still remarkably useful when you know how to leverage them properly. Last I heard through mutual acquaintances, they're both working retail jobs at different shopping malls on opposite sides of town, living in studio apartments, driving cars that are probably older than their relationship was. She's trying to rebuild her professional reputation, starting from absolute zero. He's probably still trying to figure out how a simple extramarital affair turned into complete financial and social ruin. The most beautiful aspect of this entire operation is that I never once lost my temper throughout the whole process. Never raised my voice, never made explicit threats, never sent angry text messages, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing me break down emotionally or beg them to reconsider their choices. Just systematically identified everything they valued most in their lives and methodically took it all away using completely legal means. They wanted to humiliate me for one morning in my own kitchen. I made absolutely certain they'd regret that decision for the rest of their natural lives. That's the fundamental difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is emotional, messy, temporary, and usually ends up hurting everyone involved. Justice is patient, precise, methodical, and absolutely permanent. When he smugly told me to deal with it that Tuesday morning, I guess I did exactly what he suggested, just not remotely in the way he expected or intended.